Well, yesterday was the Yortzeit of Rochel Imenu, which is Yud Aleph Cheshvan, the 11th day of Cheshvan, which I had once spoke about a while back. And I'd mentioned something then which is very important, actually, and that is that Rochel Imenu began a line of people that in many ways would serve for the survival of the Jewish people. And I had connected Yosef HaTzadik, of course, who was the son of Rochel Imenu. And ultimately speaking, both of them were involved in saving the Jewish people. Rochel Imenu, of course, because she died in Beis Lechem, where the Jews would ultimately be exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. And on the way to Babylon, of course, we know that they would pray at her grave because they passed Bethlehem, Beis Lechem. And I had mentioned she would be mispal. She would pray for them. And the reason why she is buried in Beis Lechem is because that part of the suffering that she experiences being not buried in the cave of Machpelah, the Morris of Machpelah, that Yisurin, or that suffering, that she's not buried with the Ovois and the other Imohos, and Odom and Chava and so on, that suffering atones for the Jewish people. So it's not only that she was able to pray and her treatise were accepted by God, and as a result of that, she became the model that if Klal Yisrael needs an assist to survive, which means that somebody will undertake or bear the suffering of the Jewish people in order to help them, then she would be, she and her descendants would be the bearers of that. So in many ways, that's a very important concept. And of course, Yosef, her son, took on the same responsibility, because he, of course, went to Egypt for basically the same reason, to weaken the Sultan so that the Jews should be able to have a redemption, which is many, it's really, of course, very, very important, one of the things we find, which is interesting about the descendant of Rochel Imenu, which ultimately becomes the Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. And I don't recall if I mentioned this, but it's a very important concept. We know that the Mashiach ben Yosef, what is his weapon? What is that which he uses to change the world? And we know that what it is from the last pasuk, not the last pasuk, but rather the last parsha in the Chumash, V'zois HaBrocha. And there's a rather cryptic statement that Moshe Rabbeinu says when he gives the brocha to Yosef HaTzadik. And the brocha that he gives to Yosef HaTzadik is that it's a bechor shorei hodoloi, that the firstborn of his ox, hodoloi, beauty is his. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. And v'kani re'im, and the horns of this ox is the horns of the re'im. Kaunav is his horns. Ubehem, and with these horns, Ami minagach, he will go the nations. Now, obviously, Yosef is not an ox, even though his symbol on the Merkava is an ox, but he will not, obviously not go the nations with horns of an ox. So we know that it refers really, it's a code. It refers as a metaphor of what the Mashiach ben Yosef, what is the instrumentation, that device or vehicle that he will use to go the nations, or to change, the whole structure or status of the nations. And the answer is, and that's what Moshe Rabbeinu reveals, is really what's called the Orishan. It is really the Messianic light. In other words, the information of that Messianic light is so great that it will ultimately change the entire world. You see. And the metaphor is that the B'chor Shorei, the firstborn of his ox, who's the firstborn in the tribe of Joseph, of course, is basically Mashiach ben Yosef, right? And Hodoloi, beauty is his. Now, beauty is a very important concept. What beauty is when many, many different pieces fit together in a harmonious blend. So if you look at it individually, then each one seems to be a separate piece. But if you see them all together, there's some type of, what comes out of that is a tremendous integration that expresses a beauty far beyond the pieces. So in many ways, that's a tremendous revelation. So what this metaphor is, and it says that with these horns, he will go the nations. What this revelation really is that the weapons or the horns that emanate from the head, of course, is a weapon. So it says, therefore, that the horns of the Mashiach ben Yosef, because he's the firstborn of the ox, that those things that emanate from the head of an ox, which is horns, though the metaphor for that is weapons, and the weapons that come out of the head, of course, is chokhmah, is wisdom, you see. But what the pasuk says is hodoloi. It's beautiful, you see. So the question is, what is the beauty of the chokhmah, the wisdom that the Mashiach ben Yosef has? And the answer to that is that all knowledge basically consists of two different aspects. One is the content. The content, of course, is what is the chokhmah? What is the material, the substance of the discipline itself? And then the second aspect of any major chokhmah, discipline, whatever, is the form of that chokhmah. In other words, are we looking at something which is fragmented, or are we rather looking at something which is all together, it's all integrated, you see, into a structure where you can see each piece, not only understand each piece, but you can understand the relationship between each piece, you see. That's a very important idea, because essentially the difference between the Mashiach ben Yosef's wisdom, you see, which is really the Messianic light, and the wisdom that we have today is that the wisdom we have today is all piecemeal. It's all fragmented. It's called pirud. Everything is separate, you see. But the Mashiach ben Yosef, what he does is he weaves everything together into a beautiful tapestry or fabric, where when you look at one piece, you're not. You're looking at the totality, the scope of the chokhmah. In fact, that's really what science today does. Science realizes that all phenomena, even though it exists, it's all fragmented. It's all pieces. So the idea of science is to look at the underlying structure that ties everything together. Once you have that, then of course you have a tremendous understanding, right? And you're able to predict many things. With that understanding comes the ability to predict. So that's really what they want to do. That's what a scientist does. He looks at many different phenomena in any given discipline, and he tries to tie all of it together into one or two principles. You see, that's called reduction, where he tries to reduce all thousands of phenomena together, where it's really only one idea, you see. And we see this is really what the goal of science is. Well, could you imagine if that could happen to the Torah? The Torah, in many ways, is fragmented, you see. We don't see the underlying theme or what connects the entire Torah together. We don't see that. That is concealed from us. So therefore, in other words, we can see content, but we do not see what's called, we can see chomer, material, but we don't see tzura, form. And that's the way the Rosh created the world, to discover the content, the chomer, and then to put it together into a form, you see. And what is interesting is that that's what science does. They try to reduce everything to its unification. They try to unify everything. Well, the old Rishon is really Torah unified with everything that we know in this world, with science, with Kabbalah, with Halacha, with mitzvahs. All of it really is a tremendous unification, the form or the tzura or the structure. But that's missing from us, you see. And there are reasons for that, why it's missing. But that's really the task. You want to figure out not just the fragment itself to analyze the idea, but you want to connect it to everything else. In fact, what's interesting is if you want to know something, there's really only two things you have to know. What is it? What is this piece or fragment? In other words, what is the definition? And the second thing you want to know is, how does it connect to everything else? What is its relationship to everything else? You see? And once you do that, then you basically know, really, everything you have to know. You've analyzed something, and then you've synthesized something. You see? And that's what you've done. So what the Mashiach ben Yosef does is that he unifies everything. He integrates everything. But he integrates not only the physical world, but he integrates the spiritual world, and then he integrates the physical with the spiritual, and the spiritual with the physical. You see? Where everything is seen as a tremendous jigsaw puzzle looking at the big picture. And apparently that chokhmah is the tremendous chokhmah or wisdom of reality. And what does everybody seek when you think about it? They want to know what is real. What is reality all about? You see, everybody wonders growing up, what is reality really? And value is, in this reality, what is important. That's the concept of value. But basic, first, is the concept of reality. What is it? So the reality of the wisdom of the Mashiach ben Yosef, which is the Messianic light, is the real reality. You see, it goes from one end to the other end, where you see everything connected. And once you have that, then you could decide on value. Well, within that understanding of reality, right, what is important and what is not important? That's the concept of value. But you really can only have value when you have reality. And that's called the Kani Re'im. It's really what it is. That's the horns of a Re'im, which are magnificent horns, the symmetry and so on, the way they bend and fold and so on. And these are the weapons that the Mashiach ben Yosef uses. And that's how he convinces everybody the truth of God, the truth of his will, the truth of his mitzvahs, and the truth of, the Torah itself. Because somehow he is able to weave the reality of this world with the reality of the Torah and with the reality of all the spiritual worlds. And the metaphor for that is called the Kani Re'im, the horns of the Re'im. You see. Now, what's interesting is that initially God created the world without form, in the sense that it was tohu and vohu, as it says in the beginning, which means everything was fragmented. There was no form to anything. A thing would be alone, you see. It wouldn't really be connected to anything. And then God, in a certain sense, united that. And that becomes the chokhmah that the Mashiach ben Yosef reveals to the world. The problem is that chokhmah has a history, you see. And in the beginning, it was sublime. But as the generations went on, the generations of Cain and Hevel and Noach and Avram Avinu, then as the sin grew, mankind became sinful. What they did is they interrupted the integration of the world, or the perception of that integration. They interrupted that, you see. And no longer was there a clarity in terms of understanding the beautiful unification of the entire creation. And therefore, what was the point? Why? Because the Satan, what he wants to do is disconnect everything. He does not want you to see that reality is really all integrated. Why? Because when you look at reality in that way, it testifies to a creator. When you see things organized and how everything is connected, then you realize this is not chance. Because chance does not work this way. Things don't develop, by being integrated. A classic example, if you look at a car, and you begin to explore the car, the engine, and, inside the chassis and so on, you look at it, they're not just pieces. They're all connected. They're connected in a meaningful way. But not only are they connected in a meaningful way to be able to create a purpose or to exhibit a purpose, you see, but they are incredibly complex. So therefore, that testifies that somebody had to put this together. It couldn't come together by itself, Therefore, form or structure or integration of things testifies to a maker. Therefore, when the Satan wants to conceal this from man, he does that. He's able to conceal chokhmah. He conceals the form, the structure, and to a person it just looks like haphazard reality, you see. So, which is interesting. That's a very important concept, that one of the strategies of the Satan is to make everything look disconnected, formless, where nothing really is together. That is one of his strategies. And that is why when mankind sins, you see, what happens? What happens is Chokhmah becomes fragmented. because that's what he wants. He wants people, mankind, and then the Jews, not to see the integration of the world as one unit. Because, like I said, it testifies to a creator, right? And therefore, he doesn't want that. He wants to destroy emunah. That's a very important idea. And that's why when mankind sinned, everything became much more fragmented. But what's interesting is that when the Jews went into Egypt, they were able to take out, which I had mentioned, tremendous amount of power from the Sultan. You see, they took out the power because, which I will talk about, the suffering, whatever. So they were able to weaken this tremendously, this Sultan. And therefore, as a result of that, they were able to restore chokhmah, wisdom, in the form of a unification. And you know where you see that? That's why it says, Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Jews were about to leave Egypt, since what the Jews did is they restored reality to be visible, and we know reality when it's visible has tremendous form or structure or unity, and that's called beauty. And therefore, the one, of course, whose weapon this is Yosef HaTzadik. That's why Yosef HaTzadik is called Softness Paneach, the revealer of secrets. So because of the work of the Jews, Moshe Rabbeinu was able to lift the grave, the coffin of Yosef from the Nile, you see, because that's what the Jews did. They lifted the weapons of this individual, of the Mashiach ben Yosef, from the Klippa, the Zoyama. You see? One parallels the other. And you could see that. The Pasuk says, it's a very interesting Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Vayikach Moshe is Atzmos Yosef, and Moshe took the bones of Yosef, right? He found it, he lifted it, and so on, right, from the Nile, because the Egyptians used Yosef's body, and they buried it in the Nile, and they felt that he would give a blessing to the Nile, because the Egypt only exists because of the Nile River. So they lifted it. But it's interesting, you can actually read when it says in the Torah, right? Vayikach Moshe Atzmos Yosef. Vayikach Moshe took not Atzmos Yosef, but you can read it because there are no punctuations in the Torah as Atzmus or Atzmut Yosef, which is the essence of Yosef, the etzem of Yosef. You see, and that's really the concept of the Messianic light. They were able to lift it from the Nile because the Jews had removed or enormously destroyed the power of the satanic energy, the Zoyama, and therefore he could no longer conceal wisdom or chokhmah or reality in the form where it's completely fragmented. And what they did then is, 49 days they continued removing the Zoyama, and finally, by Matan Torah, they saw what they saw was something we don't know, because what they saw is the Torah as reality. They saw the integration between the Torah and the physical universe, between the mitzvahs and how it interfaces as a trigger for the energy of the spheres as it comes down to the earth. They saw that, you see, because what they did is they succeeded in creating a reality that was incredible. Why? Because they removed the Zoyama. And like I said, one of the major strategies of the Sultan is to conceal this unity so you don't come to the conclusion that there's a creator, and it leaves you confused. So they were able to do that because of the work of Egypt, you see. And therefore, as a result of that, they received the Torah, 10 Commandments, the Luchos, right, the tablets. But those tablets were not what we have today, or had the second tablets. Those tablets was the Torah as a description of all reality. That Torah was the Torah of the Orishim. That Torah was the Messianic light. That Torah, right, was the Kani Re'im. It's really what it was. And Chazal allude to that many times, where they say if you looked at it from one side, you could automatically read the other side at the same time, even though you were reading it only from one side, you see. And that is a very, very important idea, you see. And of course what happened is the Jews sinned at the golden calf. And because they sinned at the golden calf, that chokhmah, or that ability to see the Messianic light, went back into a fragmented state, you see, because of the sin of the golden calf. So automatically, the Mashiach went into the Klippa, which is the Satan's territory. And therefore, as a result, what they worshipped was a golden calf. It was a calf, and a calf really is an ox, right? It's a symbol of Yosef. So therefore, that tells you that the aura of Yosef, the light of Yosef, which is the Messianic light, which is a disclosure of incredible reality, right, is now in the hands of the Satan, and it can now be worshipped. You see, that's why what they worshipped was an eagle. It was a calf, you see. So the tragedy is that now it could now be the chokhmah of the Mashiach was now back in the hands of the Klippa, which is the Satan, and therefore everything becomes fragmented, you see. And therefore the Rebbe Shem gave a second Luchos, which was not like the first, which was now where an enormous amount of the Torah is concealed. We no longer see the connection between mitzvahs, the Torah, and so on, and reality. It's no longer here. Now physical world is different than the spiritual world. We don't see the connection anymore. And even the spiritual world we don't really see. We do a mitzvah, we don't see how it's connected to the spiritual world anymore, how it serves as a trigger, a triggering device that brings down the light, or the energy, the holiness of the spheres, and that changes reality. We don't see any of this, you see? It's all concealed. That's what they did with the Chet Ego. And what is interesting is that there's actually a physical representation of this. Because what did Moshe Rabbeinu do with those first two tablets? Remember, those first two tablets is the Kani Re'im. That is the light of Mashiach ben Yosef. And now that has been broken, shattered at the bottom of the mountain. So he takes that, all those pieces, imagine gathering all those pieces, right? So he takes that and he gathers it, right? And then what he does is he puts it in the Oren, behind the second Luchos. So there they are in this Oren. It's the second Luchos tablets, but behind them is all the fragments of the first Luchos. Now, what is interesting, remember what I said, that the knowledge of reality consists of two aspects. One, the substance of reality, the material, the content, and it consists of the integration of all of that, all connected, combined into one idea, unity, you see. So it's interesting that all those pieces are in the luchos, are in the Oren, but it's shattered, which means from one piece, there's now thousands of pieces, all broken. But what's interesting is you still have the chomer of that Chani Re'im, of that ore, of that messianic light. But it's all shattered to 1,000 pieces. So the exact physical description of the Orishan, the first luchos, which is the weapons of the Mashiach ben Yosef, now lies in the Oren, shattered to 1,000 pieces. And that's exactly what happened to the Orishan. It is now completely disconnected, pieces shattered and concealed. So what's interesting is that the physical, situation of the luchos is the exact situation of the messianic light. And that's really what we want to bring down. Because the most important thing that a person wants to know in the end is what is reality. We think, well, people are after what? They're after power, pleasure, a great reputation. This is true. But in the end, everybody has a need to know what is out there, really. What is this universe really all about? What's the purpose of man? Why is there a universe altogether? And why do we have these laws? Who made the laws? Why this way? Everybody wants to know reality, you see. In fact, that's the greatest quest of all. And that really is the Kani Re'im. That's what the Mashiach ben Yosef reveals. And that shatters the world, where they can't believe what it's really all about, you see. Now, this then becomes what we now understand, and we still live in that shattered reality where we don't really see anything. And the problem is that whoever is the Mashiach ben Yosef, you see, does not have access to that reality. This is the problem. That is the suffering of the Mashiach, you see. I once mentioned that in the beginning of time, the Rabbi came over to Yalkut Shimoni. It's a midrash, where the Rabbi came over to the Mashiach ben Yosef. In the midrash, it's called Mashiach ben Ephraim. That's Mashiach ben Yosef. And said, in the end of time, your children, Klal Yisrael, will be destroyed. Clear. Why? Because there isn't enough time to atone for all their sins. Now, of course, the Rebbe doesn't mean everybody, but obviously there must be some type of a significant portion of Klal Yisrael that will not get Olam Haba. So what the Mashiach ben Yosef does is he offers himself to suffer tremendous suffering, to be able to atone for every Jew that needs an atonement to survive into Olam Haba. That's what he does. So he will suffer. And therefore what the Rebbe does, the Rebbe says, okay, good. And he puts his tremendously iron yoke, you see, on him, and the Mashiach ben Yosef starts screaming, what do you mean? I'm a basar v'dam. I can't do this. The Rebbe says, but I also will go into exile with you. You see, I also will assume a tremendous concealment, which is what's called a tzav v'shchina. So the Mashiach ben Yosef says, if that's the case, then it is sufficient for a slave to be like his master. But the question is, how does he suffer? You see, and the answer is, he suffers by the Kani Re'im. Exactly. Because that's really what he was supposed to reveal. So therefore the Mashiach ben Yosef is not able to come out with information, knowledge, you see, that he really is what's called privy to. And that becomes a tremendous amount of suffering. In fact, what's interesting is clearly Mashiach ben Yosef struggles, because it's interesting that even though he agreed to this, but as a living person, he fights. Because if you look at the Haftarah by Yirmiyahu Lamed Aleph, the Haftarah of in Rosh Hashanah, by second day, it says there that Rachel cries for her children, and God says, put away your tears, they will return. But it says there that that Klal Yisrael, which really means Mashiach ben Yosef, is like an ox, sheloi lumad, that is not learnt, it's untrained. And then it says, Yasi Satani, that you afflicted me, vo'ivo seira, and I was afflicted. And what that means is that clearly the Mashiach ben Yosef struggled not to do this, because what person can tolerate this terrible affliction where he cannot realize basically anything of his potential, his drives and so on. So what he says is that you made me suffer, right? And I suffered. Well, obviously, if God made him suffer, he suffered. But it means you made me suffer, but I resisted. I tried to get out of this, but it didn't help, and I was afflicted, which means that I was compelled to suffer, you see. But the main idea is the suffering of the Mashiach ben Yosef, fundamentally, is the Kani Re'im, because that's how he brings the Geula, you see. And that is why by the Akedah, just to mention this idea, when Avraham Avinu saw, not that he was not going to sacrifice Yitzchak, it says that all of a sudden he lifted his eyes and he saw a ram, right? It says he saw a ram, Nechaz B'svach, right? V'karnov, and the horns of this ram was entangled in a thicket, you see. So it couldn't move. So he was able to go over to it and take it, and he put it on the altar. So the question that, in a certain sense, that we must ask, right, is what do I care how it was prevented from running away? Does it make a difference if it couldn't run away because, it was sick? But it says in the Torah that its horns was entangled in the thicket. And if you now remember, the horns, right, is the chokhmah of the Mashiach ben Yosef. You see? So its horns, which is the Mashiach ben Yosef's chokhmah, that is his light. You see? That's his weapon. That was actually entangled in the thicket, because that's the Isurin of Mashiach ben Yosef. You see? He couldn't get out, and his ability to release that tremendous amount of wisdom was severely impacted, you see. And therefore, he was not able to do anything. But that's the Yisurin of Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. So this is what we realize, that the redemption really is the redemption from ignorance. That's really what it is. When that happens, then there's a redemption from, obviously, exile. But the release of everything depends on knowledge, on chokhmah. And when the Geula finally happens, when the Golus finally is over, the key element in that is that there is released an incredible amount of chokhmah, which is the reality itself. All of a sudden, reality is disclosed, you see. It is revealed. And that's really what the Geula is all about. And that's what it means when it says, Kimola Oretz Deo, that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. How much? As the waters covers the sea, the seabed. Could you imagine if all the waters in the world, the oceans, rivers, everything, imagine if that turned to the knowledge of God, to the Chokhmah, which is the integration of all reality. Could you imagine how much that is? It's absolutely awesome. And by the way, that's, like I said, that why is water again? Because water is always the metaphor for Torah, for Chokhmah. Like I said about the marble, that the marble was really a metaphor, right, the physical analog of the Orishan. But in any case, so that is the Geula, when all of a sudden the world is filled with the knowledge of God, which is really, the world is filled with the ultimate understanding of all reality, where both the material or the substance of the world of reality is now exposed, as well as the unity, the unification of all reality. And all of a sudden, everything is understood. History is understood. The history of all the world, all the nations of the world, from Adam until the end. The history of each individual, why he had to go through what he did, you see. The history of all the wars and the events. Even the history of the universe. You know, why did that star explode? Why is that star a supernova? You see? And how do we understand the different astronomical events in the world? You see? All of this is based on the ultimate unity of the ultimate reality. And that's the Kani Ra'im. That is the all that the Mashiach ben Yosef reveals. So, because of this, can you imagine what the world realizes? Of course, they're all in shock, because they've never seen such a wisdom. And you should know that wisdom is not merely knowing, it's not merely cognitive, it's also experiential, you know. All of a sudden there's a tremendous emotional ecstasy when you experience that wisdom. It's like a drug, you know. A drug connects itself to the brain, and then it gives you this unbelievable experience. Well, that's the chokhmah of the Orishan. You experience it besides knowing it. And therefore the experience is something which is beyond belief. You see. So, this is really what we have to look forward to. And ultimately, it's what's going to happen. When all reality will be unified, all things will be explained, everything will be understood to everybody, you see. And this is really what we have to look forward to. Any questions?
That understanding happens during Mashiach ben Yosef?
Yes. Right.
And does it come in doses? Do different people wake up at different times?
Well, that's Tchias HaMesim.
No, I'm saying wake up meaning like
understanding.
The wisdom.
That's a very good question. I mean, is it going to hit everybody at the same time, the same force? There's no question that everybody will experience what's called a quantum leap in experience and understanding. You know, whether it's going to hit everybody at the same time in the same measure, that's difficult to know, because it may be proportional to your status in spirituality. But eventually, everybody will experience it. The question is it now, or will it take a little time? You see. But there's no question that minimally it's going to hit everybody in what's called a quantum leap. You see?
Because, even now, I feel like there are people who are taking those quantum leaps, maybe not as much as when Mashiach is here, but they are gaining more wisdom, and their eyes are more opening to Hashem's glory and His purpose and their purpose in life. Is it possible that it's happening now?
Yes, I believe it is. That there is an awakening. Yes, there is. And there are certain phenomena that has happened where there is a greater awakening, yes. Just take a look at you walk into a foreign store and you can't believe the amount of things published in English, 50 years ago, all of this didn't exist, you see. So there's an enormous proliferation of Torah knowledge. I'm not even talking about the physical world, where every day, the world turns over in terms of scientific information. What happens every day is incredible in science, technology. But even in the Torah world, there's tremendous amount of growth. Just by walking into a farm store, like I say, none of this existed 50 years ago. So where's it all coming out of? All the translations of everything. Art scroll. It's incredible what the Jewish literary world is producing. So that is the Chochmah coming out of the Klippa. Yes, that's what it is.
So you could come out of your own Klippa and gain that Chochmah.
Yes. On an individual, you can.
But prior to Mashiach and Yosef coming?
Yes, you can't access the Orishim. But like I say, when you have a light, there's a light, and then there's a glow. So there is now a glow of the Orishim. That is happening. And that's the incredible proliferation of Sforim in English and Hebrew or whatever. It's just amazing what's going on, So that is true. You see. Okay, it's a great way of understanding the history of this ore, the Kani Re'im, the horns of a Re'im, what it really is, But ultimately, it's going to go the nations, yeah. It's going to be
Rabbi,
staggering, yeah.
This week is
what?
This week that we're in right now,
yes.
between now and between when the Mabul actually happened.
Yud Zayin.
Right. It's like a portal. So the portal of the Or Rishon technically can come down because it was supposed to come down many years ago.
Yes. This is what's called a propitious time, because this is the time that the Mabul, which was the Or Rishon, happened, and therefore it can happen again. Yes.
So
it would be interesting to see. What was that?
What should we do? Should we do anything specific? Should we?
Well, I don't know if we can do anything. It really depends on the national level. What is Klal Yisrael doing, or where's the timetable? In that sense, where is that holding? I don't know if we can do anything on a personal level, as a private person,
to help it. Right.
Well, I think if a Jew is aware of that, I think that itself, you could be mispalel, you could ask the Rebbeinu Shalom to speed up that process. you know, because that's always a tremendous, what's called isarusa dilatato. It's an awakening from below. And God listens to that because it's a schus, it's a merit. If somebody's aware of this and looks forward to it, you know, and aspires to this, then that itself is a schus at some level. Yeah. If you pray for this, then it could be that whoever has to be the conduit for this may all of a sudden have a vision, you know, or may all of a sudden have a tremendous idea to begin that stage. Yes, that's true. You know? Great. It's a lot to think about.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes, yes.
Rabbi, so Mashiach ben Yosef is going to bring the Geula, and he's going to.
What was that?
Mashiach ben Yosef is going to help bring the Geula. He's the one who starts to bring it.
Yes, he
right?
is.
So he's going to help us understand and that everything's connected. And
yes.
is he going to teach everyone that we're all connected so that we can all love each other and not hate?
Well, that certainly
anymore?
is going to happen. Yeah, yeah.
So
what happens is, yeah, there's no sinas chinam anymore, because he shows how all the neshamas are bound together, because that's really what it is. All our neshamas are bound together, even though we don't realize that. I once said, Klal Yisrael is like Siamese twins. 2 heads, 1 body. Except we don't realize that. We think we're really individuals. We're not. We are. Our souls are bound together in a unit, and that's called Knesset Yisrael. You see, so that certainly is going to happen. There will no longer be sinas chinam, division and hatred, you know, and animosity between Jews, and even mankind will also experience that unity. You see.
Does that start to happen before we get gathered out of the exile or after?
It's hard to know. I think it's the process of the exile. You know, it's the process of the exile that it will happen. Well, look, stay tuned. Hopefully this week will mean something.